Jaya Radha Punjabi Jaya Radha Punjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Guru Parampara ki, Prancha Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Shri Shri Kodanatai Mahaprabhu ki, Shri Tulsinath Maharaj ki, Shri Giridhari Lal ki, Shri Mati Vrinda Devi ki, Shri Nrsimhadev Bhavan ki, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Vishnu Krishna Stamtini Shri Christmas. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, chant Hare Krishna and fight. Srila Prabhupada Tamal Krishna speaking. So this is the thing that is starting to happen now, said Tamal Krishna. They are lobbying in the Congress of the United States to pass laws that if someone is abnormal, then the parents should have the right to commit him to psychological treatments. Even though the child may be 50 years old and the parents 70 years old, if the parents think that the child is not sane, then they have the right to have the child committed. This is very dangerous, said Prabhupada. They told Prabhupada of a devotee who had been kidnapped while distributing books at an airport. The court had given the girl's parents legal authority to have her confined for 30 days in a special center in Arizona run by deprogrammers. They also told him that among the lobbyists advocating kidnapping were powerful groups of Christians and Jews who had become active because they saw that other movements, not only the Krishna consciousness movement, were taking young people away from the religion of their parents. Tamal Krishna suggested that a probable result of ISKCON's court case in New York would be to establish ISKCON as bona fide. Defenders of civil rights in America were alarmed at the threat to constitutional liberties, and therefore the court case was generating great interest. It was a test of freedom of religion. Tamal Krishna told Prabhupada it was the biggest test case of the decade, and that the American Civil Liberties Union had taken it as one of their main priorities. 2 states have passed laws making this deprogramming legal, said Brahmananda Swami, and they also give tax exemption. That means the government is giving support. Yes, said Prabhupada, they are afraid that these Krishna conscious men may capture the government. Yes, agreed Tamal Krishna Goswami. Some of them are saying that the Krishna conscious organization is very powerful and that our ambition is to take over the world. Srila Prabhupada laughed. That's a fact. Well, let us see. It is a fight between Krishna and the demon. Let us do our duty and chant Hare Krishna. Everything will be all right. There were so many demons. Prahlad Maharaj was a 5-year-old boy, and his father was such a big demon. But still Prahlad Maharaj was victorious. Similarly, you are all like Prahlad Maharaj. The fight is there. Chant Hare Krishna, depend on Krishna. You will come out victorious. Nrsingadev will come. So the poison of Krishna consciousness is acting now. That is good. If we come out victorious, that will be a great victory. As they spoke, the electricity went off, and Prabhupada's room, as well as the rest of the building, was in darkness. Within a few moments, a devotee entered with a kerosene lantern. Prabhupada began to reminisce, saying that electricity had been introduced in India when he was a young boy. At first, not every house could afford electricity, he said, and if a man had a good gas light in his house, he was considered rich. He said that the street lamps were carbon arc, and the man who changed the carbon rods would throw the used ones in the street. When the carbon would be changed, said Prabhupada, they would throw, and we children would collect them. What would you do with them? Asked Chamal Krishna. Srila Prabhupada laughed and said, play. We have collected something. So electricity was introduced in our life when we were 10 or 12. But still you were able to read, said Brahmananda. Yes, said Prabhupada, with this lantern. He recalled that his father would purchase kerosene for the lanterns. His father was not rich, but by buying and stocking things in quantity, he used to amply provide for his family. Life was simple then, Prabhupada concluded, but civilized. The sannyasis began telling Prabhupada about how a military dictatorship had taken over in Argentina and had officially banned the Krishna consciousness movement. $20,000 worth of books had been seized and devotees had been arrested. Many other persons were being regularly arrested or shot in the streets. Things are deteriorating everywhere, said Prabhupada. Very quickly, added Brahmananda. So this will give impetus to Krishna consciousness. Yada yada hi dharmasya glani. Lord Krishna appears when religious principles are disturbed. Don't be disappointed. Krishna will act through his movement and kill them, these demons. How it will be done, you cannot know now, but it will be done. Let us remain true soldiers, that's all. And suppose you die in the fight. Fight means with vow, with determination, either to gain victory or die. Because it is a fight against Maya. Why you shall be afraid of being killed? When there is a fight, one must know that either I'm going to be killed or gain victory. Jiva va marava. Those who are devotees, either they live or they die. It's the same thing. While they live, they are serving Krishna. When they die, they will serve Krishna. Jiva marava. Chaktvadeham puna janma naiti mam eti. At the time of death, the Krishna conscious person goes to Krishna. He goes to Krishna. So what is the loss? We are working for Krishna, and if we die, we go to Krishna. What is the loss? Srila Prabhupada ki. You have some tissues. So text 20 today. Yeah. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 13. Rahugana converses with Javat. Text 20. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Rahugana Tvam Api Hi Advano Asya. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvano. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Sanyasta Danda Krita Bhuta Maitra. Sanyasta Danda Krita Bhuta Maitra. Asaj Chitatma Harisevaya Shitam. Asaj Chitatma Harisevaya Shitam. Gyanasim Adaya Tarati Param. Gyanasim Adaya Tarati Param. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra. Asajjitatma Harisevaya Shitam. Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra. Asajjitatma Harisevaya Shitam. Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra. Asajjitatma Harisevaya Shitam. Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra. Asajjitatma Harisevaya Shitam. Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param. Rahugana Tvam Api Yadvanosya. Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra. Asajjitatma Harisevaya Shitam. Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param.
Rahuganatwamapi advanosya
Rogano Twamipi Advanosya
Sanyastadanda kritabhuta metra
Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra
Asajjitatma harisevayasitam
Asashritatma Harisevya Shitam
Jnanasimadaya tarati param
Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param. Vaishnavis.
Rahuganatwamapi
Advanosya
Sanyastadanda
Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra Asajjitatma Harisevaya Shitam Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param. Rahuganotvamapi Yadvanosya Sanyastadanda Kritabhuta Maitra Asajjitatma Harisevya Shitam Jnanasimadaya Tarati Param. Rahugana, O King Rahugana, Tvam, you, Api, also, he, certainly, Advana, of the path of material existence, Asya, this, Sanyastadanda, having given up the king's rod for punishing criminals, Kritabhuta Maitra, having become friendly to everyone, Asachita Atma, whose mind is not attracted to the material pleasure of life, Harisevaya, by the means of loving service to the Supreme Lord, Shitam, sharpened, Jnana Asim, the sword of knowledge, Adaya, taking in hand, Tara, cross over, Atiparam, to the ultimate end of spiritual existence. Translation. My dear King Rahugana, you are also a victim of the external energy, being situated on the path of attraction to material pleasure. So that you may become an equal friend to all living entities, and I advise you to give up your kingly position and the rod by which you punish criminals. Give up attraction to the sense objects and take up the sword of knowledge, sharpened by devotional service. Then you will be able to cut the hard knot of illusory energy and cross to the other side of the ocean of nescience. Please repeat. My dear King Rahugana, you are also a victim of the external energy, being situated on the path of attraction to material pleasure, so that you may become an equal friend to all living entities. I now advise you to give up your kingly position and the rod by which you punish criminals. Give up attraction to the sense objects and take up the sword of knowledge, sharpened by devotional service. Then you will be able to cut the hard knot of illusory energy and cross to the other side of the ocean of nescience. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna compares the material world to a tree of illusion, from which one must cut oneself free. Narupamasyeya tatopalabhyate nanto nachadi nacha sampratishta ashvatamenam suvirudamulam asangashastrena dridena chitva tatapatam tatparimagitavyam yasmin gatana navida nirvatanti bhuya tameva chadyam purusham prapadye yata pravritti prasvista purani. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this tree with the weapon of detachment. So doing, one must seek that place from which, having once gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything has begun and in whom everything is abiding since time immemorial. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verses 3 and 4. My dear King Rahugana, you are also a victim of the external energy, being situated on the path of attraction to material pleasure. So that you may become an equal friend to all living entities, I now advise you to give up your kingly position and the rod by which you punish criminals. Give up your attraction to sense objects and take up the sword of knowledge, sharpened by devotional service. Then you will be able to cut the hard knots of illusory energy and cross to the other side of the ocean of nescience. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Radhita Shri Vishakam Vitam Shah He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanshikalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhuyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sarigora Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So here this is Jad Bharat has been engaging Maharaj Rahugana's intellect and mind by giving instruction in very using metaphors and using powerful metaphors to enable the king to identify the philosophy of Bhagavad Dharma, the philosophy of transcendental detachment with his own situation and with the situation of the citizens. He's very much aware that despite all of the efforts that the king puts into trying to elevate the citizens, still by the power of the modes of material nature, then they constantly get dragged down again. So It's interesting, in Jad Bharat, in 2 lives previously, he himself was a king, a great emperor, Bharat Maharaj, not in his previous life, but the life before that. And he ruled the citizens for many, many, many years. And he also had much opportunity to see how living entities become entangled in their lusty desires, which are fueled by, those lusty desires are fueled by meditation on the ever-changing material energy. It's described in the Bhagavad Gita how the modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, are constantly battling for supremacy. So sometimes a living entity is very seriously and earnestly trying to follow the laws of human life, the laws of Dharma, Artha, and Moksha, like try to have an honest living and gradually develop their spiritual life, perform sacrifices, give charity. They're trying to follow the process of karma yoga. But just a little slip into like just contemplating the objects of the senses, even if someone is following very, very strictly the rules and regulations of karma yoga, because in their heart they have the remnants of desires of many previous lifetimes. So even though they're following very strictly, if they allow their senses just to contemplate some form of sense gratification, then that contemplation can activate some desire from a previous life. These are called vasanas. And vasanas are very deeply rooted, strong desires for material enjoyment. And we can't judge, we can't understand how strong those desires are. We can't understand by the practice just of karma yoga or rules and regulations. We don't know how strong those suppressed desires are. So, Jad Bharat is saying, my dear King Rahugana, you are also a victim of the external energy. So the king is not thinking that he's a victim of the external energy. He's thinking that I'm the teacher of the citizens. I'm following the Brahmins. I'm engaging all of the citizens in the whole land in various activities, dharma, artha, karma kanda. I'm engaging them according to their propensities in the varnashram system, by which they can gradually become elevated. That's how he's thinking. The king, when he's punishing, even when the king is punishing Jad Bharat for stepping on ants, he's not acting out of lust. He's acting correctly as the king. He's chastising his servant for disturbing the relationship between master and servant. But Jad Bharat is pointing out that even though you are executing your duties very well, but still you are a victim of the external energy. Because Maharaj Rahugana Jad Bharat could perceive that Maharaj Rahugana became unnecessarily angry. But because he could also perceive that he was an elevated rishi, an elevated king, and that he could understand that he was quite high in consciousness, and then Jad Bharat saw this is an opportunity to really emphasize to the king that you can't, just as you can't elevate the citizens by regulative activities, just as many of them fall away and fall victim to lust, you also will fall away and become victim to anger, lust, and greed. But he compliments him in one sense. He's saying, so that you may become an equal friend to all living entities. So he knows that the king has that desire. He knows that the king actually has the well-being of the citizens at heart. So he's saying, yeah, I understand you want to become a friend to all living entities. But he's saying, but you will not be able to do so. You'll just be frustrated. You could be a king for 10 lifetimes in the future thinking, well, I didn't get it right in that way. Let me go back and consult with the Brahmins. Let's somehow change the state policy so we can engage people better. So this is, so Jad Bharat's saying, no, it's not possible. You'll never be satisfied. You'll always be frustrated. You'll always be disappointed. So we can see throughout the Bhagavatam, great sages like Jad Bharat are instructing kings in this situation. Just earlier in the 5th canto, Narada Muni in the 4th canto, Narada Muni was instructing King Prachinabhahishat, who'd also looked after the citizens, performed all of his religious duties, and attempted to maintain Varnashram Dharma in the society. But due to frustration, gradually he'd become dissatisfied, and therefore to fulfill that dissatisfaction, he started to engage in what we call nepotism, where he just looked after his family, and he started to abuse his power to gain a little bit of sense gratification. So we can see this is what happens in all leaders who are not pure devotees, irrespective of how compassionate they are and how well-meaning and how much they want to really help people, because people are on different levels of detachment and spiritual realization. It's never going to be the case that any state or any country or any community is ever going to really make progress, because people are being born constantly with desires. And so it doesn't matter how many plans governments make, and even if they're extremely well motivated, they'll never be able to achieve peace in the kingdom. So Jad Bharat, out of compassion, is saying, you'll never be able to become a friend to all living entities by being the king. So he's saying, I now advise you to give up your kingly position and the rod by which you punish criminals. So he's not saying you're an evil king who punishes criminals. No, he's saying you're a very good king who punishes criminals. It's not an easy thing for a compassionate king to punish criminals, because the compassionate king understands that criminals are criminals because they're also fighting with material desires. That they've been born in a situation, where they're inheriting karma. They've been born in a difficult situation. They may have a very difficult childhood. They may encounter violence in childhood, so many things, and they become criminals. The king understands that, just like present leaders, present child psychologists and counselors. They understand why people become criminals. But so Maharaj Rahugana was like that. He wasn't punishing people out of some kind of gratification or just to exert his power in a corrupt way. He was punishing the criminals because he understood that there needed to be law and order in the state, and that he wanted to elevate them. He wanted them to be elevated. But Jad Barrett is saying it's not possible. You'll never be able to achieve your goals in that way. So, but if you want to really become an equal friend to all living entities, and then you must cut the hard knot of illusory energy and cross to the other side of the ocean of nescience. So in the description of Srila Prabhupada's conversation with devotees in Mayapur, where the devotee was relating the coup in Argentina, where a country all of a sudden became subject to great oppression, and there was lots of human rights violations, as there were in many countries in South America and still are in many countries throughout the world. Srila Prabhupada pointed out that it was getting worse, and certainly it is getting worse. And we know that because more and more people are going to university and studying peace studies and international relations and, all different kinds of political science and sociology. So more and more people understand the process by which people become corrupt and criminals. But even though they understand, even though so much time and energy is put in to try to bring about a perfect social system, things are just getting worse and worse and worse and worse very, very quickly. And really it's because there's a lack of spiritual teachers who can cut through the attachment, especially of politicians and especially of social scientists and economists, cut through their attachment, thinking that just by some kind of expertise or just by collaborating with people all over the world that somehow or other they can put things on the right course. But it's not possible. It's the nature of the material energy that there's always going to be, the modes are always going to be fighting for supremacy. There's always going to be passion, ignorance, and goodness. And therefore, leaders are always going to become frustrated. They're going to become frustrated, especially if they're very compassionate people who really want to bring about peace in society. Those people are really going to get severely frustrated and disappointed. And they often become, then when they become like that, then there's a great danger that the suppressed desires in their hearts, perhaps from previous lives, will arise, and they'll become degraded, and they'll become influenced by other degraded people. So Srila Prabhupada was like a great example of a sadhu in that conversation, saying, yes, it's getting worse, and we don't know where it's going to spring up. We just don't know. We don't know. We should not think that it can't happen here in this country. Definitely it can, because everyone's got very strong suppressed desires in their heart. And so we're very fortunate to be part of this International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which is giving us the means to cross over this illusory energy, to cross over to the other side of the ocean of nescience. And it's interesting in the word for word, tarati param, to cross over to the ultimate end of spiritual existence. So, and that indicates that it's not sufficient for us just to become like perfect renunciants. It's not sufficient for us to become like jnanis and just be able to, through our mental power and through our practice of Ashtanga Yoga, to remain peaceful and just not to be disturbed by the world. It's just not sufficient. We won't be able to maintain it, because in our heart there is an eternal seed of devotional service, of pure love for Krishna, and of pure love for all living entities. And there'll always be that tendency there to want to see everyone blissful and happy. So Srila Prabhupada was responding to that news from the threat to the devotees in Argentina, that a devotee is not disturbed in any situation, whether there's a threat of death or whatever situation. Devotees are not disturbed because they understand that the material world is a place of death. It's actually called Martya Loka. Abrahma Bhuvanal Loka Puna Avatano Jina. From the highest planet in the material universe down to the lowest, all the places wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who understands that Krishna is the source of all living entities, he's not disturbed by this birth and death. But it's not just sufficient to understand and remain undisturbed. When we're reading these descriptions, then it will pacify us. It will enable us to become undisturbed. It'll pacify our mind. But as I say, we've got desires in our heart that will not be pacified. So Srila Prabhupada said, how did Srila Prabhupada say that we could pacify those deep desires? What do you think? How can we pacify those deep desires in our heart? Yeah, by devotional service. So it's it's very interesting. There's one lecture by Srila Prabhupada where he's commenting on the verses in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, verses 6 to 10, and says it's not possible to be inactive even for a second. This is Nahi kaschit shanamapi jatu tishchatya kamakrit karyate yavasha kama savaprakti jaigana. Everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. One who restrains the senses of action but whose mind dwells on sense objects certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. On the other hand, yas twindriyani manasa niyam ya rabbate juna kamendriya kama yogam asaktasa vishishyate. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior. So Srila Prabhupada just said that the whole history of the world is the history of sense gratification. He describes that in 1933, Adolf Hitler decided that people should have sense gratification in a particular way, that the state should be organized in a particular way to maximize the sense gratification of the people who he considered to be good people. But because not everybody agreed with him, then other people who were adopted Winston Churchill as their leader, they decided, no, we don't want sense gratification like that. We want sense gratification like this in this country, or and President Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin. No, we don't want sense gratification like that. We want sense gratification like this for our people. So So Srila Prabhupada said, so therefore the whole history of the world, the whole history of the universe is just the history of sense gratification. One leader decides that he's going to satisfy the citizens of his nation in this way, but someone disagrees. So then Srila Prabhupada says, and then after some time, people become disgusted with this process. They understand, oh no, the reason that there's so much conflict and suffering is because we are trying to impose our ideals, we're trying to impose our ideology onto others. So therefore, let us become very liberal, let us become broad-minded, let us accept everybody's culture and become like respectful to all philosophies and all ideologies and all cultures and all ethnic minorities. So this is a kind of jnana. Let's give up our own desire and be equipoised, and let's control our senses. Let's just work for the well-being of all living entities. But Srila Prabhupada describes that it doesn't work, because we actually, in our hearts, we have love. We actually have love for all living entities on a spiritual platform. And so therefore, by engaging all of our energy in serving Krishna and Krishna's devotees and understanding that this is the common platform of equality, by engaging in that real activity, then we'll be really satisfied and our senses will actually naturally become peaceful. And just like when you have when you're really, really excited about something and your whole energy becomes focused on one point, your physical energy, your mental energy, your emotional energy, your intellectual energy. When that happens, you're not aware of like all of the things that disturbed you. And you can tolerate a lot of pain and a lot of disturbance. And just like when parents have a new child, they can sacrifice so much. So, but a new child also has material desires, and a beautiful baby can turn into a real monster, not because of the parents, but just because those like deep desires are there from a previous life. So all of Srila Prabhupada's books and everything in the Bhagavatam is there to give us graphic understanding and realization that doesn't matter how good material prospects appear to be or how knowledgeable and compassionate people appear to be, the nature of the material world is it's always going to bring about frustration. And there's no means to pacify those feelings of frustration other than to engage all of our mind, senses, emotions, and body in the devotional service of Krishna. So that's why the spiritual masters are called sadhus, because they've got a sharpened sword. With their sharpened swords of knowledge, then they're cutting through the illusory knots of our attachments. But unlike the king chastising his citizens, then the acharya's swords are actually swords of pure love. So just like we're singing Srila Prabhupada's pranams every morning, Divya Gyana Hriday Prakashito, Prema Bhakti Yahohiti Avidya Vinashayati. So Srila Prabhupada, when he cuts through our illusion and enables divine knowledge to manifest in our hearts, he's doing that with prema bhakti, with pure love. And so even though it may feel very painful to be in some way, because we have a tendency when we're attacked intellectually or emotionally, we have a tendency to try to protect ourselves. So sometimes when we hear very strong words from a spiritual teacher or from the Shastra, then we don't allow that to take place, and it doesn't feel like pure love. It feels like a sharp sword. But anyway, the potency of the spiritual master is that his words will actually take effect, even if we think we haven't, even if we think that we've rejected them intellectually or emotionally. If we just give audience to them, it will actually affect us. Just like a doctor, if a child comes in, just like I remember this story of Palika in Mayapur a few years ago, when Palika, Shranga's child, Guru Bhakti and Shranga's child, she damaged her finger in some way and the nail was half hanging off. So they took her to the doctor in Mayapur, and the doctor could immediately see that the nail had to come off. So somehow or other, he just distracted the attention of the child and ripped it off. So, of course, she was screaming like anything. But, so this is Srila Prabhupada. We see there in Mayapur, Srila Prabhupada kind of changed the subject. First of all, he was talking about a very serious matter about the deprogrammers kidnapping devotees. And then all of a sudden he changed it and he started talking about his childhood in India and like collecting the used carbon arcs. And then when somebody said something about devotees getting like hassled in Argentina, then he just immediately said, yes, this is the nature of the material world, but devotees are not disturbed, whether they live or they die. Devotees are proud of being part of Krishna's army. So we're actually very fortunate to be part of that army. So even if we've never been warriors in our life or we've never been great heroes of any sense, but now we're actually in this amazing International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So thanks very much for your attention. Are there any questions or comments?
One question, Prabhu. Thank you very much for the class. I think you expressed a bit, but if you could please elaborate a bit. So in the translation it says, so that you may become an equal friend to living entities. I now advise you to give up your kingly position and the rod by which you punish criminals. So is it the king is being advised to give up his duty, his kingly position, so that he can become an equal friend to all living entities? And likewise, does it mean like we need to give up whatever position we are in our daily lives, in our workings, in order to be an equal friend to all living entities?
Well, yeah, Jad Bharat definitely was telling the king to give up to give up his kingdom and like renounce his kingly duties. He was definitely telling him to do that. However, sometimes in the Bhagavatam, like someone like Narada or Maitreya Rishi will give this similar instruction to kings, to tell them just renounce it all, go to the forest, live as a mendicant, and absorb yourself in pure devotional service. But then later, they may be asked to come back and become the king again. This was the case with Maharaj Priyavrata. He'd been a king for a long time, and he'd renounced his kingdom, gone to the forest, but then he was asked to come back again. And also Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad was undoubtedly a pure devotee from birth. After Lord Nrsimhadev had killed Hiranyakashipu, and then he wanted Prahlad to become the king, even though he was a pure devotee. So sometimes, for example, and also sometimes we can see Srila Prabhupada, he would appear to give contradictory directions to some disciples. He would tell them to give up married life and become sannyasis. And then other people would say, no, you need to get married. But it doesn't mean that one devotee is more advanced than another. It may be that the one who got married was more advanced, because Srila Prabhupada saw this person is very, very pure, and he can set the example of a pure householder to millions of people. Another may not be so pure, and he can perhaps go and be a sannyasi. Perhaps he will become pure and become a, So, but as we say, whatever role we play in the army of our acharyas or in the society of devotees, whatever role we play, then we need to cut down this strongly rooted tree. So the tree of the material, as it's described in the 15th chapter, the tree, there's two trees in one sense. One is the universal tree, which describes how the modes of material nature are controlling all of the activities of the universe. But another tree is the tree of our own existence in this material world. So, however we act externally, we have to cut down the tree internally. That's the and it's only a spiritual master who can instruct us how to act externally or advise us. But the instruction for all of us is the same internally. So here, it may be that Jad Bharat saw that it was necessary for the king to cut down everything, to just renounce absolutely everything, to be able to experience the kind of bliss of spiritual life. We don't know, there's no details as far as I understand of what happened to the king afterwards. But, I don't know, is that any help?
Yes.
Okay. Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Shri Nirjalakadashi ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Jai.